It was November in 2012. The Cornerstone Bank in Waco, Nebraska was robbed of about $6,000. Bank employees were able to give police just a really good description of the young teenage girl who had robbed the bank, and actually were able to describe the car that she had made as a getaway. But the police didn't really need their help, because this young thief made a YouTube video titled "Chick Bank Robber." She fanned out the cash in front of the camera. 19-year-old Hannah Sabata held up a sign that read, "I just stole a car and robbed a bank. Now I'm rich. I can pay off my college financial aid, and tomorrow I'm going for a shopping spree." Later, she held up another sign which said, "I told my mom today was the best day of my life. She just thinks I met a new boy." Well, needless to say, her brief criminal career ended later that week because police were able to take her into custody. Not very bright. Kind of the antithesis of wisdom. Hannah really needed to wise up. But isn't it interesting how easily pride can become a trap? Our theme verse for this series, Wise Up, is Proverbs 2:6. Wisdom is a gift from a generous God, and every word he speaks is full of revelation and becomes a fountain of understanding within you. This week, we talk about this pride trap. Proverbs 29:23. Lift yourself up with pride, and you will soon be brought low. But a meek and humble spirit will add to your honor. Pride does some insidious things. And I want us to look at how some of that plays out, because there isn't anybody in this room today, there's not anybody that's online with us today, that somewhere along the way you haven't gotten a little cocky because you felt good about what it was you were doing. I'll never forget the Sunday that I was going to ride a neat old Cushman scooter into the service to promote Motorcycle Sunday. Little practice round on Saturday out in the parking lot, because I hadn't ridden any kind of bike in a while. And what I didn't understand was, though that Cushman was immaculate, those old Cushmans didn't steer all that well. And I had gone around the parking lot and was feeling pretty good about myself. I was in a borrowed leather jacket. Didn't need the helmet, of course. I was one of those really bright guys. And so I began to feel a little cocky, sped it up just a little bit, came around the corner down at that end of the parking lot, and just as I came around, it wasn't steering quite fast enough, and I just barely caught the edge of the curb right out there where the mailbox is. And now I did a little dance on the Cushman all the way up to, and bless Jack Lawrence's heart, he had a really nice Harley in those days that had a sidecar. And it was right under the canopy. And I managed to find it with the Cushman. And ended up in the hospital with brain bleed. Couldn't drive a car for, I think it was 6 weeks after that, because just a little power went to my head. Think what if I'd been on a real Harley? We all get caught. So how do we not let it get us? What does pride do to us that traps us and keeps us from living in wisdom? First thing is that pride has delusions. When John wrote the church at Laodicea in Revelation, he talked to them about where they were, and he said, you're really not hot or cold for God. You're lukewarm. You're just kind of neutral. And man, I think that describes a lot of the church in our world today. Is the fire of revival is not burning hot a lot of places, but at the same time, people are not just totally cold toward God. It's easy to become lukewarm and think everything's good. And he said to that church of Laodicea, Revelation 3:17, "You claim I'm rich and getting richer. I don't need a thing. Yet you are clueless that you're miserable, poor, blind, barren, and naked." One of the biggest mistakes that pride does in us is when we begin to see us as our own source. You talk to someone who's been successful, who tells you because it's how smart they are, how good they are at what they do, how they are the best salesman ever, or they may be the finest craftsman, and they tell you about it. And it's easy to begin to think you're the one who caused you to be able to do what you do. And the truth is, we are clueless when we think that way. When we begin to think, I don't need anyone else, including God. I'm going to tell you something. We need the body of Christ. We need to be in community with other believers. And we need to be directly connected in that body to Christ, the head of the church. That's why it is so important for us as a church to be very connected to each other and connected to God. Because otherwise we begin to think, you know what, I don't really need anyone else. And then the next thing you know, we begin to don't think we need God. And the problem is, what happens is we're living in a broken reality that has completely false perception and narrative. What is it that we tend to say to people when they ask us, how are you doing? Good. Okay. Great. Now, the sad thing is we'd almost rather hear that than have somebody who's on the other side of the coin that for 10 minutes depresses you with how bad they are. But it's important that we learn how to live in honesty and to recognize that we were not created to be independent, nor were we created to be dependent on other people. We were created to be dependent on God. Our security and our significance was meant to be fulfilled out of our relationship with God so that then we can be in interdependent relationships with other people. So that you have the opportunity to be involved with people who sometimes pick up the slack for you and sometimes you pick up the slack for them. And you bring giftings to the table that they don't have, and they bring giftings you don't have. But when you come together, it produces a synergy. That's where great marriages are built. When couples begin to recognize that you're not the same, and it's a good thing. Because if that works together like it should, you're going to actually become stronger because of what you both bring to the table and how that can flow together in the relationship. And that needs to be true in our lives. And so it's very important that we don't live in pride's delusion. Next, pride has a showroom. Pride always wants to tell you how good it is. Have you ever been with anybody who's a one-upper? Whatever you tell them, they have something they can tell you that's bigger and better than what you just told them. Have you been around anybody that's a name dropper? So they begin to tell you. I used to just crack up when I lived in Florida and worked for Pastor Betzer. Because I'd have people who would say to me, well, when I was talking to Dan the other day, like they were like this. Well, number one, I knew Dan, but he was still Pastor Betzer to me. And I knew him a lot better than any of those people who were Dan and I this. And the funny thing is, I wanted to look at some of them and say, Dan doesn't even know your name. It's easy to get caught in the trap of really believing that you are something and what you have is something. Have you ever seen a guy get in a sports car? I mean, some of you have been around here long enough to remember Stella, my Trans Am. I'm going to tell you something. There was a demon in Stella that would get a hold of the gas pedal when I was driving. That's all I'm going to say. But we get like the man in Luke chapter 12 who was doing so well. And he began to look at his barns, this farmer. His barns that were just full to the brim. Verse 17 says, he thought, what should I do now that every barn is full and I have nowhere else to store more? I know what I'll do. I'll tear down the barns and build one massive barn to hold all my grain and goods. Then I can just sit back surrounded with comfort and ease. I'll enjoy life with no worries at all. You know what his problem was? He was measuring with the wrong measuring stick. We so frequently place our values on things that are temporal instead of things that are eternal. And stuff that's a temporal, there's going to be issues with sooner or later. We just got a brand new dryer, and it's already broke. I don't know what Grace did. No. She didn't do anything to it. The minute it was running, something had broken in it. And it is such a pretty dryer. It's this nice gray color. But I'm going to tell you that gray is meaningless when you need to dry clothes. And that's what happens when we begin to let temporal things begin to become too important. And we get caught in this danger of trusting that the accumulation of stuff is going to be what our answer is. We are so caught in our culture with materialism and consumerism. It's a measure of how can we build bigger barns? What kind of bigger house can we have? What other car do we need? What kind of gadget? I mean, now, you know, I love the term iPhone, iPad, because it's just the epitome of our culture. It's all about me. And we are all caught in that world of consumerism where it's very easy to get the latest gadgets to do the latest things because there's so much that's available to us in the world we live in. And as you begin to do that, we get caught up. And basically what that man didn't understand, an abundantly full barn is only one storm away from destruction. Ever seen where a tornado comes through? And all of a sudden whatever fantastic building is just totally wiped out. And the storms of life are going to come. And when those storms of life come, we are going to experience loss of material things from time to time. God does protect his people. God restores things the enemy steals. But the thing that's so important is to recognize that we can't let ourselves be so caught in a worldly way of thinking that we miss what really is important. How do you keep trusting God? And how do you keep recognizing he is your source? Because if you're not careful, what's going to happen, you'll get caught with the showroom of your success, the things that make you really feel good. I will tell you right now, and you know this, I love these boots. They're ostrich. And I will always be grateful, Mark. Told Mark one day a story of a pair of boots I had years ago, and he felt sorry for me and said, well, I want you to get some new ones. And I said, oh, you shouldn't. Thank you. And here they are. It's not wrong to have material possessions. It's when material possessions have you. When they become more important than the things of God within your life. And then here's what happens. When we let pride begin to do its work, here's the results of what happens when pride is finished. Proverbs 16:18. Your boast becomes a prophecy at a future failure. The higher you lift yourself up in pride, the harder you'll fall in disgrace. The problem is the arrogance of self-promotion clouds your vision of reality. As you begin to promote yourself, as you begin to look and say, well, yeah, I've done this, or I can do that. Pastor Betzer used to say the best fiction he ever read was resumes. We boast about what we can do, don't we? And it's so important that we don't get caught in that trap, because here's what happens. If you have you ever been where someone makes animals out of balloons or things out of balloons? And when they first show up, here's this little balloon with no air in it. And man, when they get through, how did they turn that balloon into a dragon? But if they're good, they can do that kind of stuff. But what happens if they decide they want the dragon to be a little bigger and they keep putting air in it? There is a point at which the balloon will pop. And that's what happens when you begin to let your ego blow up. It reaches the point where it can't be supported because it's not built in reality anymore. And when that happens, what literally happens is the world begins to blow up. One of the things I heard someone say many, many years ago that I've never forgotten. You meet the same people coming down the ladder that you stepped on going up. And I was on staff at Calvary Church in Texas. I was part-time doing singles ministry and was bivocational. I was still working a secular job. But somehow, in the course of things, I had been given a really nice office at the church. And there was another guy who was in the same position I was in that he was bivocational. And the day came that he was actually brought full-time on staff at the church. And he was this arrogant guy. He really was. And it really bugged him that I had the office that was real close to Pastor George's office, that was one of the finer offices in the church. And I don't know how he did it, but he managed to finagle his way into convincing Pastor George or someone else that he was there all the time and I was very rarely there. And so I didn't need that office, he did. Not only did he do that, but he went without waiting for them to do anything to change it. He went, boxed all my stuff up, and I came into the office and everything was gone. And then I found my office now was actually not even the main building. And there was my little box of stuff sitting on that desk that was kind of plain. I had a choice to make. Do I let it get to me? And I determined I was not going to say a word. And I didn't. Because it was okay. I didn't need that other office. I very rarely used it. You know what's sad? It was not much longer after that till he got caught having an affair with a woman when he was married, he didn't just lose the office. He lost his home, his ministry, and everything. God help us that we don't allow those things, because literally then when I saw him, it was hard for him. You meet the people coming down that you stepped on going up. If you have to take advantage or cutthroat someone else, it will come back and it won't be pretty. And if you get stepped on, let God vindicate you. Don't vindicate yourself. Because where you're going to end, this is what pride always does. If you let pride run its course, you will be completely disgraced, devastated, and depleted. That's the final state of being proud. So what are some checklists? What are the diabolical characteristics of pride? Jeremiah 49:16 says this, "As for your terror, the pride and arrogance of your heart have deceived you. O you who live in the clefts of the rocks, Selah, also called Petra, who hold and occupy the height of the hill. Though you make your nest as high as the eagles, I will bring you down from there, says the Lord." If you've ever been to Petra, it's an incredible place to see, because literally there are these magnificent buildings carved out of stone that are actually graves. They're tombs. But if you look, it's not just, and literally it's a descent for 5 miles to get to Petra through all these rock caverns. And you look, and up above even these, here are more caverns that you don't get to that have been carved out of the whole thing. And that's what he's talking about. He says, Petra, he says, you look at that and you think you're flying with the eagles, but God says, I'll bring you down from there. What is the checklist of things that you look and see pride begins to do to you? One of the things that is so true is underneath, people who exhibit pride are actually fearful. Fear simultaneously reveals our lack of trust and our poisonous self-reliance. One of the things I've learned through the years is some of the people who seem most boastful, who seem overconfident, are some of the most insecure people I've ever met. If you want to mess with somebody, compliment them on their clothes. Say, man, that looks really nice. It's a shame it doesn't fit you. If you're a smart man, you'll never do that to a woman. But we need to understand this, that fear causes people to overcompensate. Here's another thing that happens. This is another characteristic. Entitlement and ingratitude makes us think we deserve far better than we have. I want to tell you something. One of the problems we have in American culture is that we have become an entitled society. It's my right. I should have this because the government will pay the check. I don't know how to tell you this. Do you know where the government gets its money? It gets its money from borrowing the taxes your grandchildren are going to pay because yours got spent years ago. And yet we want more entitlement. We want more health care insurance. I walk into a beautiful hospital here. I won't call the name, but it's beautiful. The waterfall that's supposed to be in my backyard is right in the lobby. And I walk by that and I go, this is incredible. And then I go, my insurance is paying for this. But we live in a world where we like nice things and we feel entitled. It's our right. And this is the other side of that coin. We don't understand gratitude a lot in our culture anymore. It's a lot of ingratitude. A lot of times we don't bother to thank people for what they've done for us. But man, we're quick to tell them if they don't do it how they should. Here's another thing that goes along with that, is people pleasing. Do you know anybody that's a people pleaser? It wants us to have approval so much from pleasing men instead of God. If you can find a people pleaser that will do something for you, get ready for a pretty good ride till they decide it doesn't matter anymore, because they just need your approval. Are you a people pleaser? Do you need approval so bad that to get approval, you'll do whatever it takes? That's again what pride does. It causes us to have that need because we want the recognition we're going to get because we pleased other people. And then there's this whole thing of sufficiency. And we then again back to this trusting our own ingenuity rather than God's handiwork. And it's so important that you and I realize we are not self-sufficient. Whatever I am able to do successfully is because God blessed me to be able to do it. And then there's this other element of this characteristics of pride, which is hypocrisy. It's that false sense of self-value and the feeling of superiority to others. And what do you do when that happens? You act one way when you feel another. Have you ever had somebody who said real nice things to your face and then you found out they were saying awful things behind your back? Have you ever said real nice things to people and behind their back you said really awful things? It's a real predicament when they catch up with you, isn't it? And yet we live in a world full of hypocrisy. And that's part of what pride does. And then the final one is rebellion. Rebellion is a resistance to God's word and the principles of God's word. And it comes against spiritual authority. iPhone, iPad, me, my. I want it my way. And if you try to tell me to do anything differently, then I'm sorry. I'm out of here. Or you're out of here. And what happens is we end up in a world where there is rebellion against spiritual authority. You need to hear this. I know that we live in a world where there's been abuse of spiritual authority in churches, in ministries, and that's painful. And it's never right. You can't justify it. But it doesn't give us the right to ignore authority that's God-given. And so what you do is when you find out that there's authority who is not godly, then you don't leave yourself under that authority. You come under authority that's living in a way that they're desiring to please God. But we must live under authority. That's one of the problems we have today. There's a lot of people who say, I don't need any mentors in my life. I don't need someone to be spiritual authority in my life. Yes, you do. We all need authority in our life. I am very thankful that I have authority. There's a chain of authority for Grace and I, and for any pastors in Foursquare. For me, my Rush is my area pastor, but I'm his regional pastor. So there's times that I'm in meetings that even though I'm the regional pastor, just so you know, it's Mike's meeting because it's an area pastor meeting, and because I pastor LifeBridge, I'm in that area. I don't walk in the room and say, excuse me, Mike, I'm the regional pastor, you're the area pastor. No, I go in and I don't say anything about any of that, because at that moment, I'm under his authority as the area pastor. And then when we're in meetings that I have with the 3 area pastors, guess who runs those meetings? because that's the way it's set up. That's the authority structure. I'm the regional pastor, and as area pastors, they're coming under that authority in that context. S.B. Morphus, who was here just a few weeks ago and preached, is the associate district supervisor. She's my immediate authority spiritually. And then Antonio Sims, who is our district supervisor, is her authority and my authority through SB. But I don't run to Antonio to try to run around SB because she's my immediate supervisor. And then Antonio is under the direction of Randy Remington and Wendy Valesco, who are the national leaders. There is an authority structure within our organization of Foursquare, and we need that. And wherever you're at work, your boss may be incompetent in your way of thinking. Thank God for their incompetence, because that caused them to hire you. Ouch. Do you give honor to those that you work for? Do you give them your full day? I'm going to tell you something. If you're at work reading your Bible when you're supposed to be working, you're sinning. But I'm reading my Bible. I'm praying for my company. Well, that's a bunch of bull. That's hypocrisy. If you're supposed to be working. Now, if your boss has said to you there's not anything to do and you have free time, you can do what you want, then that if you've got all your work done, then you can read your Bible. But if there's work you're needing to be doing, it isn't that God's a higher authority, so I'll read my Bible instead of doing my work. It's pretty logical, isn't it, at the end of the day? And when we begin to understand those things, we can't live in rebellion. So we've got to deal with fear, entitlement, people-pleasing, self-sufficiency, hypocrisy, rebellion. All of those things are the diabolical characteristics of pride. What's the antidote for pride? Humility. 1 Peter 5, verse 5. God resists you when you are proud, but multiplies grace and favor when you're humble. If you bow low in God's awesome presence, he will eventually exalt you as you leave the timing in his hands. Pour all your worries and stress upon him and leave them there, for he always tenderly cares for you. Be well balanced and always alert, because your enemy, the devil, roams around incessantly like a roaring lion looking for its prey to devour. Take a decisive stand against him and resist his every attack with strong, vigorous faith. Now, let me talk to you real quickly about humility, and then we're going to receive communion together. Being humble doesn't mean that you're milquetoast. There's people who think that's what humility is. Well, that person's humble because they just set off over in the corner and don't want to be offensive to anybody, and they just are so, don't want to say anything that you might misunderstand, and I just want to just be whatever I can be, doing nothing. It's what we frequently have made humility, and that's not what it is at all. God created us to take dominion. He said to Adam and Eve, I've given you this world, take dominion. The problem is they sold it out. And our challenge is that the enemy is just insidious in what he does, because he takes what we were gifted from God with, which is the ability to take dominion. We're supposed to take charge in this world because that's what God ordained. The problem is when we don't get in line with doing through his spirit to our spirit, taking dominion, you know what we end up with? Control. Know anybody with control issues? You know what control is? It's very misplaced dominion. It's satanically inspired dominion. So it isn't that we're not supposed to live in dominion, but we're supposed to live in dominion without the control of sin. And then we have to make ourselves available to be a conduit for God. Are you willing to let God flow through you? Is there anything God could ask you to do you wouldn't? Are you willing to be a vessel of honor and serve God? I'll never forget when we were having some special evangelist, and I can't remember who it was now in Florida. And we were just having the place packed every night. And it was attracting young families. And so our nursery was just overwhelmed. So I thought to myself, you know what? I've been asking people to help in the nursery and people aren't responding. I'll just go help myself. Far greater appreciation for people who do nursery work after that night. But I'm glad I was willing to be a conduit. Is there anything God could ask you to do that's below you? Anything that you don't think you should have to do? You need to be conduits for God. That's humility. It's important to understand this. We need to both be journey and destination focused. We're on the journey for God. We're going to a destination, but we don't get so caught on the destination that we miss the joy of the journey. And we don't get so caught in the journey that we forget that this world we're just passing through, heaven's our home. Never forget, you have an enemy who makes a lot of noise, but he doesn't have any real teeth. I love the thought that Jesus pulled his teeth out. So he goes about as a roaring lion. But when he attacks you, all he can do is try to gum you to death. Don't let him. Exaltation comes through submission. If you want to be lifted up, submit to the hand of God. Submit to serve and let God exalt you. And then remember this, humility doesn't have a sense of there is real purpose, a value that I need to fulfill. It isn't about just sitting around and doing nothing, but it's understanding that we are called to a supernatural destiny, not a natural ambition. Our natural ambitions will get us in trouble. Supernatural destiny will take us to a place of fulfilling everything God has. Just a few days ago, Charles Stanley went home to be with the Lord. 90 years old? Pastor of First Baptist in Atlanta for, I think, nearly 50 years. And he knew that was his destiny. And he lived it out. What's your destiny? What has God called you to? What are you living to the full purpose? And what you begin to understand, when you begin to get this humility, here's what it will do. It will cause you to make the right choices for the eternal destiny, and your natural ambition doesn't matter anymore. And yet here's what happens. When you submit to God, he exalts you. I love what I shared a few days ago that was shared at Pastor Jack Hayford's funeral by his brother. Literally, when it came time for him to go to college, he had a full ride scholarship to the University of California at Berkeley, or he had a choice to play professional baseball with, I think, the Red Sox. He didn't do either one. He chose to go to Life College and enter the ministry. And then he came to South Hannah Street in Fort Wayne, Indiana for the first pastorate with a handful of people. And then he went to church on the way with another handful of people that were mostly older people. And there was only like 20 people. And he had had a chance to pastor a church that ran 1,500. And he said to God, which can I do? And God said, either one. If you do the church of 1,500, you'll be able to do the very best you can do. But if you'll take the Van Nuys Foursquare Church, you'll get the best of what I can do. And at the peak of his career, Church on the Way was about 10,000 people, besides what God had released in international ministry. What Christianity featured on their front page as the gold standard of Pentecost, Jack Hayford. And yet Jack Hayford was a humble man. That's the picture today. Don't let pride trip you up. Live in the humility of God. And then make wise choices so you avoid the trap of pride and you release the amazing productivity God's called you to. I'm going to ask those serving communion, would you begin to serve? I'm going to ask you to hold the elements till we've all been served, and then we're going to receive it together. If you're not a member of LifeBridge, but you're a member of the body of Christ, I invite you to participate in the communion with us. I think it's so important that we receive communion as we close out this message on the trap of pride. You know what the secret is to pride not destroying you? It's never losing sight of the blood of Jesus. What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. That's humility. But then we sing that old song, there is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. It's not a contradiction. It's an understanding of truth. Is the humility of the fact that nothing but the blood, but the power in that blood comes alive within us. And then we remember that his body was broken for us. And because his body was broken, then I am healed, spirit, soul, and body. I am made completely whole in Jesus, in every way. Whatever you have need of today, the body of Jesus was broken for you. The greatest picture of humility that Philippians described. He thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took on the form of man and became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God's exalted him and given him a name that's above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, every tongue should confess that Jesus is Lord. Shall we receive the bread together? Could we drink the cup? Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. We give you glory. We give you honor. We humbly bow before you. We humble ourselves in your presence. God, have your way. Let us be the people that you've called us to be. Let us serve you to the full capacity you've called us to. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.